Shalom and welcome to this edition of It's All About the Aliyah. You know, as you can imagine, the war in Ukraine has caused immense challenges for our teams there. And then the war that broke out in Israel also has caused hesitation for some to return to the land of their historical promise. But here today to share some of the stories from the field is our president and CEO, Pat Frame. Pat, I've got a report here in my hand that you sent me. I'd like for you to elaborate on that today with our audience.
We'll try. There's obviously a lot happening in a lot of countries and different reactions in different places to the war. I just want to start with something from Ukraine. I wake up every morning and one of the first things I do is check my WhatsApp messages. And I always know if it's been a tough night in Ukraine, because then I'll have a message from Misha, our team leader in Ukraine, who says, "It's okay, we're all right." And then I say, "Oh, okay, it's been a heavy night." Yeah. And he sent me this description the other day of kind of how they're getting used to living under the situation in Ukraine. I'm going to have to read some of it because to be fair to him and get it accurate. So he wrote, "Hello, we in Kiev and the team in the other cities are fine after yesterday's attack. Of course, the word okay has different meanings. Some of the girls endure everything with a lot more nerves, but that's understandable. A little more about how we've got used to living during the war. Yesterday at 2 a.m, we already knew that 9 planes had taken off, which meant there would be rocket attacks. We already hear in advance what time the missiles will be over the territory of Ukraine. It was reported at 2 a.m. that the alarm would be sounding at around 6:30 a.m. So we have time to prepare." A comment from me is that's one difference between Ukraine and Israel. Because of the distances in Ukraine, they have more time to prepare and to hide where they can to prepare for rocket attacks. Wow. The alarm was declared at 5:54 a.m. I got up, prepared chairs in the hallway for myself and my mother, and prepared sleeping bags to protect ourselves from glass fragments if there was a shockwave. Misha and his mum live on the 9th floor of an apartment building. There's no bomb shelter. There's no basement where they can go. Then I calmly woke up my mum and told her not to worry, but the missiles were already close by. We sat down, covered ourselves with our sleeping bags, and just sat listening. I read to Mum from Telegram what's happening, where and how the rockets are flying. Then they suddenly changed their direction and almost all of them were heading to Kiev. We're warned in Telegram that it will be loud now, and then it will be really loud. After the first wave of attack, there's silence, and I suggest to Mum that we have breakfast. So we had tea and sandwiches, and I read that there's a second wave of missiles, so we sat down again in the corridor and remained silent. Unfortunately, we're getting used to this reality. I think, yeah, it gives us a taste.
Yeah, I mean, just the idea of that being a normal or reality, that is unfathomable. And sad. And I know anybody who's experienced and maybe lived through war can relate, but for those of us who haven't, that's hard to relate to.
And I think what he's sharing will be similar for the team all over Ukraine. Some of them will have basements, some of them not. And of course, it helps us to think about the situation in Israel too.
Yeah. I imagine you have a lot of stories like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He also shared a story of another of our team members in Kiev, Volodya, who lives with his family. I think it's 3 children. On the 14th floor. I lived on the 12th floor at one point when I was in Kiev. I know how high that is.
Yeah.
3 small children. So they have to consider, where they go to. There's no bomb shelter. So they go to the nearby metro station. So when they knew that the rockets were coming in at 6 o'clock, they woke all the children up at 5, fed them breakfast, and then took them to the metro station to hide there. Now the trains are running. There's passengers as well as people using it as a bomb shelter. And the children are given their tablets to play on while they wait. The alarm lasted for 3 hours. When the children got tired of sitting, they began to travel back and forward on the metro. Volodya says that the children perceive this as order, and the subway is better than sitting and listening to explosions on the 14th floor. And his mum, they were sharing their experiences with their mums, and his mum had a heavy nosebleed the day before because of the stress and the nerves.
Oh my goodness. I can't imagine the trauma that they're all living with. The kids are going to have some type of trauma to live with, even if they've tried to make it a game or normal. That's traumatic. They're going to live with that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And it's very sad that it has become normal for them. Yeah. I mean, the smaller ones almost aren't remembering anything else right now. And
wow. Do we have any good news coming from the field?
Well, yes, I'll share one that started off as bad news and ended up as good news.
Yeah.
And that was in Patagonia in Argentina. And our rep was there. He'd been invited to go for some days holiday, but also to speak at a congregation while he was there. But just, the week before, there was some protest from some of the members of the congregation who were very pro-Palestinian and opposed to him sharing. But the pastor wanted it to go ahead and actually encouraged those who were speaking out against it to maybe just miss Sunday morning's service. But then the pastor himself took ill, and he advised our rep, Guillermo, not to go, but he would organize another meeting with the leaders of the church and leaders of one or two other churches in the town. And that's what he did. And that ended up being probably a more profitable meeting, because they really were interested to learn more, want to take it forward, want to do something, and really affirm their support for not just Israel, but also the work that Ezra does in helping the Jews return. So it's a good case of something that the enemy was trying to disrupt, but turned for good.
Amen. That's good news. I mean, anti-Semitism is off the charts around the globe. And you mentioned that region of the world, South America. A lot of people probably don't associate the Aliyah, the return of Jewish people, from that region of the world. So I'm glad you're talking about it. And I imagine you have other stories from our reps there, don't you?
Yeah. Argentina and Brazil are the main countries we work in South America. In both countries, the war in Israel is, in a way, encouraging people to want to stand with Israel, to want to kind of join their forces with what's happening in Israel. There are some other problems in Argentina, which is making Aliyah very difficult, but that's a subject for another time, and more to do with their economy. Mm-hmm. Of course, we have the Argentinian president who's very pro-Israel, but unfortunately, so far he's not making any good changes that's affecting the economy anyway in Argentina. In Brazil, there was a number of people. The first reaction was, kind of negative. And of course, as with everywhere, flights were cancelled. So even if people wanted to go, they couldn't go. There was no flights. But gradually the flights have restarted. And there was a number of people from Brazil who sped up their Aliyah process because they wanted to go. And some went to go and volunteer, and some made their Aliyah earlier than they were planning to. So there's a kind of positive and a negative at the same time.
Well, that's good. So they actually had a sense of The dirty word in many people's mind is Zionism, but that Zionist loyalty rose up in some, and they wanted to go and help. That's good.
It makes me think of, after the 6-Day War, that was what wakened up the Soviet Jews.
Mm.
Because they couldn't believe, that Israel won against such mighty opposition.
Yeah.
And it made them it woke up their Jewishness. And I think there's a sense that this war is doing some of the same thing to Jews in countries outside of Israel. There are those who are frightened to go, but there's others who are stirring up that sense of identity, I think.
Oh, that's an interesting observation and good comparison. I like that. Speaking of the war and people coming from all over, we're not only in the former Soviet Union, and now you just mentioned South America, but what about Europe? What's going on there that what you're observing?
Yeah, Europe's interesting. I mean, I've seen two different figures for France in terms of in December, the Jerusalem Post quoted that Aliyah applications had gone up by 430%.
Wow.
The other day, I read something that was written in mid-February by the Aliyah Ministry of Aliyah in Israel, which said it was up by 300%. But either way, it's a huge amount.
It's a lot. Yeah.
And 1,200, that meant already, I think that was the December one, that already 1,200 applications had been opened. 1,200 is quite a lot for France.
That's short time. I think I see France is a good indicator of what we're going to see coming up, and maybe even in North America one day because of this rise in anti-Semitism.
That same report from the Ministry of Aliyah said that the applications were up in Canada by 150% and in the US by 100%.
Oh, there you go.
In the UK by 40%.
Wow.
We've seen that. We've seen a rise in interest from people connected with us and asking us for information, advice. And currently we have about 100 people sort of expressing interest in making Aliyah. We've never had that here in the UK before.
I think times are changing. That's interesting.
Yeah. And we're also seeing that growth in anti-Semitism in these countries, which will is having its influence, of course. And in France, at the moment, people are opening their Aliyah files. Of course, they won't all need our help. Many of them have the resources to do that themselves, but there will be those who do need our help. But France, they tend to wait until the summer to make their Aliyah, with schools breaking up and so on, which makes sense. And that's looking true. At the moment, they're a bit afraid to leave. There are some elderly leaving, but the families are still holding on and hope to hold on until the summertime. But we're getting more queries and questions. So the process always starts some months before the day you get on the plane and leave.
Oh, sure. It takes months and sometimes years, doesn't it? Okay, so Pat, we've looked at the former Soviet Union, South America, Europe. We work on 3 continents. One of the interesting countries that was in this report is spans both Europe and Asia, and that's Azerbaijan. You have a report, I believe, as well.
Azerbaijan's always interesting because it's a Muslim country, but even the government has good relationships with Israel, and the people always say, if they're asked the question, have you experienced anti-Semitism? They're actually offended by the question and say, no, never. Right. I've only read one account of a family who felt they'd suffered anti-Semitism in Azerbaijan. A lot of, initially, people were afraid to leave. There were also problems because there were no flights. Mm-hmm. But flights started up earlier this month via Georgia. And we heard just a couple of days ago from our rep in Georgia that they expect early March to have a flight of over 100 Olim from Georgia. And I'm sure that's including some of those from Azerbaijan. But it's the same feeling. There are families who want to go more because of the situation, and some who are just wanting to wait and see how it pans out.
Yeah. Yeah, I get everyone's different. And, we often talk about that homing pigeon spirit rising up in individuals. In this case, now you have that other motivation of, Zionism or loyalty to their people. But whatever it takes, God is making a way to move his people home, isn't he?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, no, ask.
Oh, I was going to ask, since we are in Asia, there was another country on the report, Uzbekistan. Did you have a report?
Yes.
Yeah.
Uzbekistan is more or less the same because initially the Israeli embassy was working intermittently due to the situation, which means the consul's not always available and the whole atmosphere was a bit tense. But, that also doesn't stop, even if there are no flights, it doesn't stop our work in any of the countries because we're doing that pre-Aliyah process.
Right.
So helping people with their documents goes on whether there are flights or not. You're just getting them ready for that stage. So Alex in Uzbekistan was saying, we were continuing with our normal work with the documents, helping with translations and the legal things that have to happen. But also from Uzbekistan, which is slightly off the war topic, but they had I think it was January, maybe it was the end of December, Olim coming from Turkmenistan. And that was the first time the country had been open after COVID.
Oh, my goodness.
So we had we had one family, I think, in December and a few families in January. So they'd been waiting, possibly even with their visas from before COVID, and they're still coming. And normally there'd only be a handful every year. It's a closed country. It's not one that you could just pop off and visit very easily. And the Jews have to leave through Uzbekistan.
Wow, thank you for bringing that. I bet you most people, would not be aware of the situation there. In fact, I'm really grateful for this report because you're bringing out a lot of, again, highlights from countries that many people may not have even heard of, and yet God is working through these countries. And you said something else that I thought was notable, that we're working on that process prior to the Aliyah, which is kind of unique to Ezra International, isn't it? I'm not sure if there are too many organizations that do what we do when it comes to document research and preparation.
I don't think any of the others do the level of documentation that we do, and that's primarily for Ukraine and Siberia. Need that level of. There's other countries too, but particularly those ones, and that's really the team's expertise. Of course, we do other things, and other organizations do part of that process, certainly pay for some of the paperwork involved that needs to be done. But the kind of research and the step-by-step help in proving the Jewish roots is, a real strong part of Ezra's work.
Yeah. And you mentioned a moment ago, you kind of went away from the war a little bit. Bring us back, because there's an interesting country that's been involved in the Aliyah because of the war in Ukraine. They're not at war themselves, but they've been very active, more so than ever before because of the war, and that's Moldova.
Yeah.
You had a report from there as well, I believe.
Yes. And Aliyah, our rep in Moldova, wrote in her report in October, it's just quite interesting how she words it. She's got war in capital letters. She said 2 wars. That seems to me a lot. And they had the same issues at the beginning. The consulate stopped working. People, she said, were very confused. Now, they are mostly dealing with refugees, still from Ukraine, Jewish refugees, but increasingly Russians coming via Moldova. So probably every month it's about 70 to 75% Ukrainians, 20 to 25 Russian, and a handful of Moldovans who are leaving. But then when the Russians go, it costs them a bit more money to get to Moldova, and they got stuck because no flights were leaving.
Yeah.
And then that's more expensive for them and for us if we're helping them with accommodation and so on, because it's more money to go back home. And it's they've often given up everything, so it's also not that easy to go back home.
Yeah.
Same for some of the Ukrainians. If they came from the south of Ukraine, it's not too difficult to go back. But it's still more money for them, more money for all the organizations if they've got to go hold on to them. But now they're back to regular flights, and it's a flight a week at the moment that's going from there.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, Pat, we have about 3.5 minutes left in our time. Do you have any other updates you can give us in that amount of time? I know that there's you've mentioned even in your own region of the UK, and of course there's things going on in Australia, I believe, as well.
Yeah, I think two things I'll say. Go back to that report from the Ministry of Aliyah. They have said that since the 7th of October, over 6,500 people have made Aliyah despite the war.
That's incredible.
That's, I think, a substantial number. And then it takes me to Isaiah 49, where it says at least twice in that chapter, and it's a very key Aliyah chapter. Anyone involved in Aliyah knows Isaiah 49. But at least twice in that chapter, it says very clearly, as the sons and daughters return home, God will deal with the enemies of Israel. And I think our Western mindset is, oh, we should stop everything because there's war and it's dangerous. But that is not what the scripture says. And how it all works out, of course, there are more challenges also in Israel, but many of these people are coming from countries where there are also many challenges. And God is able to cope with the challenges there and help them to settle despite the issues that are going on.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that has been one of the questions we've been receiving calls about. Is the Aliyah still going on? And yes, obviously it is by the numbers, but more importantly, by the word of God, he will contend with those who contend with his people. And you're absolutely right. The process continues, and we have to be there. We have to be there both in these nations to help them get through the process, and of course with our partnership on the ground, helping them once they're in the land. So very important point that we don't stop. We have to look through heaven's eyes, through God's eyes and his word,
Yes.
not through what we see with our own eyes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and the consul in Ukraine is actually encouraging our teams to encourage people, even if they're not got any immediate plans to leave, to get their paperwork in order now, go for their consular checks, get ready. And even if they never go, it helps their children and grandchildren when their turn comes. So if we can use this time of a bit quieter in terms of transport to even do more work with people on papers, it's a good thing.
Well, that's a great point too. We, as we said earlier in the program, sometimes it takes months, sometimes years through the process. So go ahead and get started. But the children, what a beautiful gift to your children if you do not end up helping them and save them the trouble and the time of proving their Jewishness, which is again one of the keys for our audience's sake. The paperwork is not just for bureaucracy, right? It's to prove the Jewishness, because with the right of return laws, we want to make sure that we as Ezra International don't do the proving. We help them through the process, but the consulates have to approve the individuals that they are indeed Jewish to make their choice.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's true. Very good. Well, Pat, this has been good, and I'd like to make this a habit. Try to get you on here and get reports from the field more often, so that our audience can hear directly. You know, you're being the mouthpiece for our representatives on the ground, and that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our job is to support them. So if we can help get their voices out there, that's all good.
It is, you know, they are true. I've always said they are truly the ones that, I mean, they're the boots on the ground, truly the ones doing the work, and we have to just support them in any way we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, thank you, Pat. And speaking of support, speaking of that support, to you, our audience, you can be the ones who support our representatives. You can be the ones who provide the funds that we need. God will work through you to bring that support in, and those funds are doing miracles that we're watching every day. Young and old Jewish people making it home to Israel, thanks to the support that you give. So please go to EzraInternational.org, give your best gift today, and partner with God in this process. Thank you. God bless. We'll see you next time.